The wind howled like a wounded animal through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying with it the promise of death. Hannah Rose pressed her back against the rough timber, cradling her newborn daughter against her chest as she watched her husband draw his final, rattling breath. "Jacob," she whispered, though she knew he could no longer hear her. His face, once ruddy with health and quick to smile, had taken on the gray pallor of winter ash. The fever had consumed him over 3 days, burning through his body like prairie fire until nothing remained but this empty shell. Sarah stirred in her arms, making the soft mewling sounds of hunger. Born just 2 weeks ago. The infant knew nothing of the tragedy unfolding around her. Hannah pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around them both, her own body trembling whether from cold or grief. She could no longer tell. The door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall, sending a shower of snow across the packed earth floor. Ezekiel Crane stood in the doorway, his imposing frame blocking out what little daylight remained. Behind him, she could make out the shapes of his other sons, Thomas, Matthew, and Samuel, all of them dressed in their heavy winter coats, their faces set in grim determination. "Is it done then?" Ezekiel's voice cut through the cabin like a scythe through wheat. He didn't wait for an answer, his cold blue eyes taking in the scene, his youngest son's still form on the narrow bed. Hannah huddled in the corner with the baby. "Father Crane," Hannah began, struggling to stand while keeping Sarah secure in her arms. "Jacob passed not an hour ago. The fever." "Save your words, woman." Ezekiel stepped into the cabin, his boots leaving muddy tracks across the floor she'd scrubbed just yesterday. "We've come to settle matters." Thomas, the eldest of Jacob's brothers, shifted uncomfortably behind his father. Unlike the others, his face showed a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but he remained silent, as they all did when Ezekiel spoke. "There are no matters to settle," Hannah said, finding her voice despite the fear creeping up her spine. "Jacob was your son. This is his daughter, your granddaughter." Ezekiel's laugh was harsh and without humor. "That remains to be proven. You were married scarce 9 months ago. And now here's a babe claiming Crane blood." He shook his head slowly. "The law is clear in these matters. Without proper documentation of legitimacy, the child has no claim." "You know that's not true." The words burst from Hannah before she could stop them. "Jacob and I were married before Judge Henderson himself. You were there." "Were we?" Ezekiel's smile was cold as the wind outside. "I recall no such ceremony. Do you, boys?" Matthew and Samuel shook their heads in unison, their faces masks of indifference. Only Thomas looked away, unable to meet Hannah's desperate gaze. "The cabin and its contents revert to the family," Ezekiel continued, moving through the small space as if taking inventory. His eyes lingered on the few precious items Jacob's rifle mounted above the fireplace, the iron cook stove that had been Hannah's pride, the small chest where she kept what little money they'd saved. "You can't do this," Hannah said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew how hollow they sounded. In the territory, might made right, and the Crane family held sway over the local authorities. "Where will we go, the storm?" "That's no concern of mine." Ezekiel picked up Jacob's rifle, running his hands along the worn stock. "You have 1 hour to gather what personal effects you can carry and leave. After that, we'll assume you're trespassing on Crane property." 1 hour, Hannah's voice cracked. "In this weather, it's murder." "Murder?" Ezekiel turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "Strong words from a woman of questionable character. Perhaps you'd prefer we involve the authorities. I'm certain they'd be interested in investigating the sudden death of a healthy young man, especially given the circumstances of your marriage." The threat hung in the air between them, as real and dangerous as the storm outside. Hannah understood perfectly. If she protested, Ezekiel would use his influence to paint her as a murderess, a woman who'd killed her husband for his meager possessions, in a territory where justice was swift and often wrong. She wouldn't live long enough to see a trial. "Please," she said, hating the pleading note that crept into her voice. "At least let us stay until morning. The baby—" "The baby is your problem, not ours." Ezekiel set the rifle aside and moved to the chest, opening it without ceremony. 1 hour. As his father and brothers began their grim inventory, Thomas edged closer to Hannah. When the others weren't looking, he pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch, heavy with coins. "For the little one," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. "There's a trading post at Willow Creek, 2 days south, if you can make it there." He didn't finish, moving away quickly as Matthew glanced in their direction. Hannah clutched the pouch, feeling the weight of what might be their only chance at survival. The next hour passed in a blur of motion and despair. Hannah gathered what she could, a change of clothes for herself, the few cloth diapers she'd made for Sarah, a portion of the salted meat from the larder, though Ezekiel watched her like a hawk to ensure she took no more than the meanest share. She wrapped Jacob's Bible in oilcloth, the one thing Ezekiel didn't contest, perhaps thinking it fitting that she should carry the word of God into her likely death. The hardest moment came when she had to leave Jacob's body. There would be no proper burial, no chance to say the words that needed saying. She pressed her lips to his cold forehead one last time, whispering a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll keep her safe. Jacob, I swear it." When the hour was up, Ezekiel stood by the door, pointedly checking his pocket watch. "Time's up." Hannah wrapped Sarah in the buffalo hide that had been their bed covering, layering her own thin shawl over top. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough for the journey ahead, but it was all she had. She tied her meager possessions in a bundle and slung it over her shoulder. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. The cabin where she'd been a bride, where she'd given birth, where she'd watched her husband die, all of it would belong to strangers now. Or worse, to family who'd chosen greed over blood. "You'll answer for this," she said, meeting Ezekiel's cold stare. "Maybe not in this life, but you'll answer." "Get out," was his only response. Hannah stepped into the storm, and the door slammed shut behind her. The wind hit her like a physical blow, driving ice crystals into her face. Sarah began to cry, the sound barely audible above the howling gale. The world had become a white wall of fury, with no path, no direction, only the relentless cold seeping through every layer of clothing. Fort Redemption lay somewhere to the east, but in this weather, she could walk in circles until she dropped and never know it. She forced one foot in front of the other, bent nearly double against the wind, trying to shelter Sarah with her body. Each step was a battle, the snow already knee-deep and growing deeper. Her skirts, heavy with ice, dragged at her legs like chains. Behind her, she could see the warm glow of lamplight through the cabin windows. They hadn't even waited for her to get out of sight before making themselves at home. The smoke from the chimney rose straight up for a few feet before the wind tore it to shreds, just as it would tear apart her and Sarah if she couldn't find shelter soon. But there was no shelter in this white hell, only the vast indifference of the prairie and the storm that seemed determined to claim them both. Hannah clutched Sarah tighter and pushed forward into the darkness, carrying with her the weight of a dead husband's promise and a newborn's fragile life. The territory had no mercy for the weak, and tonight, she was the weakest creature alive. But weakness could become strength when it had to, and Hannah Rose had no choice but to find that strength or die trying. The prairie had become a white ocean of death, each snowdrift a wave threatening to pull Hannah under. She'd been walking for hours now, though time had lost all meaning in the endless struggle against wind and cold. Her feet had gone numb long ago, and she stumbled more than walked, using the last reserves of her strength to keep Sarah pressed against what warmth remained in her chest. The baby had stopped crying. That terrified Hannah more than the storm itself. She paused behind a skeletal cottonwood tree, its bare branches offering no real shelter but at least breaking the wind for a moment. With shaking hands, She pulled back the layers of hide and cloth to check on her daughter. Sarah's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, her breathing shallow and irregular. The infant's eyes were closed, her tiny body limp in a way that sent panic racing through Hannah's veins. "No, no, no," she whispered, rubbing the baby's cheeks, trying to stimulate some response. "Stay with me. Little one, please, God, don't take her too." A weak whimper rewarded her efforts, but Hannah knew they were running out of time. The trading post Thomas had mentioned was 2 days away in good weather. In this storm, it might as well have been on the moon. She rewrapped Sarah as best she could and pushed on. Each step was agony now, the snow having worked its way into her boots, turning her feet into blocks of ice. Her skirts, frozen solid, scraped against her legs with every movement. The bundle on her back felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The wind shifted, and for a moment, Hannah thought she heard something beyond its howling, a rhythmic sound, like drumming. She shook her head. The cold was playing tricks on her mind. People saw and heard all manner of things before the winter claimed them. Her grandfather had told stories of men who'd walked cheerfully to their deaths, convinced they saw warm cabins and welcoming fires where only snowdrifts lay. But there it was again, not drumming, but hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving with purpose through the storm. Hannah's heart lurched. Travelers meant possible salvation, but they could also mean danger. A woman alone with a baby. Carrying what little money Thomas had given her, she'd be easy prey for the wrong sort of men. The sounds grew closer, and now she could hear voices calling to each other in a language she didn't recognize. Not English, not Spanish. Something else. Musical despite the harsh conditions. Terror gave her strength. Hannah stumbled toward a fallen tree trunk, its massive bulk creating a small hollow where snow hadn't completely filled in. She crawled into the space, pulling branches and snow over herself and Sarah, trying to become invisible in the white landscape. The hoofbeats stopped nearby. She could hear the horses snorting, their breath steaming in the cold air. Men dismounted, their voices carrying on the wind. They were searching for something or someone. Hannah held her breath, pressing her hand gently over Sarah's mouth to muffle any sound the baby might make. Through a gap in her makeshift shelter, she caught glimpses of the riders. They wore heavy furs and moved with the easy confidence of those born to this harsh land, native warriors. She realized, probably Sioux from their dress and the few words she could make out. Her grandfather's stories flooded back tales of raids and scalping, of women taken captive and never seen again. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying they would pass by without noticing the disturbed snow that marked her hiding place. But the winter had already taken too much from her body. A violent shiver ran through her, causing the branches above to shift and fall away. One of the warriors turned at the sound, his sharp eyes scanning the area. He called out to the others and started moving in her direction. Hannah knew it was over. She clutched Sarah tighter, preparing for whatever came next. The warrior approached slowly, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. When he reached the fallen tree, he stopped, looking down at her with eyes as dark and unreadable as the storm clouds above. He was tall, even accounting for her crumpled position, with a face that might have been carved from the red stone of the territory itself. Scars marked his cheeks, ceremonial. She thought, not from battle, despite her fear. Hannah noticed the intelligence in his gaze, the way he took in her condition and the bundle in her arms with quick assessment. The warrior called out to his companions in his own language, then surprised her by speaking in accented but clear English. "Where is your man?" The question was so unexpected that Hannah couldn't answer immediately. When she found her voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "My husband died this morning. His family cast us out." The warrior's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He turned and spoke rapidly to the other men who had gathered behind him. An argument seemed to break out, with harsh words and gestures. Hannah caught a few English words mixed in soldiers. Trouble, foolish, finally. The tall warrior turned back to her. I am Robert Crowfeather, though your people call me Red Cloud. Can you stand? Hannah tried, but her legs had lost all feeling. She managed to get to her knees before collapsing again. Red Cloud watched her struggle without immediately offering help, as if testing her resolve. My baby, Hannah gasped, pulling back the coverings to show Sarah's still form. Please, even if you leave me, take her somewhere warm. She's done nothing to deserve this. Red Cloud knelt in the snow, reaching out to touch Sarah's face with surprising gentleness. His fingers found the pulse at her throat, and he frowned. More rapid words to his companions. And then 2 of them were beside her, lifting her with easy strength. To let an infant die from exposure would bring no honor to any warrior. Red Cloud said, standing, We will take you to our winter camp. Whether you survive the journey is up to the spirits now. They wrapped her in additional furs, securing her to one of the horses. Red Cloud himself took Sarah, tucking the infant inside his own heavy buffalo robe. Hannah wanted to protest, to keep her daughter close, but she could barely keep her eyes open. The last of her strength had fled with the release of tension. As the party began to move, she heard continued discussion among the warriors. One, younger than the rest with fresh scars on his arms, seemed particularly upset about their decision. He gestured toward the direction of Fort Redemption, speaking the name like a curse. Red Cloud's response was sharp and final. Whatever he said ended the argument. Though Hannah could feel the tension among the group, they were taking a risk by helping her. She realized relations between the Sioux and the army were always strained, and harboring a white woman and child could be seen as kidnapping if the wrong people found out. The journey became a blur of motion and half-consciousness. Hannah drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes feeling the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, sometimes lost in dreams where Jacob still lived and Sarah played in fields of summer grass. Once, she came fully awake to find they'd stopped to rest the horses. Red Cloud was feeding Sarah something from a small pouch milk mixed with herbs. She thought, though the baby was taking it eagerly enough. Thank you, she managed to say, though her lips were cracked and bleeding. Red Cloud glanced at her. Save your gratitude. You are not safe yet. As they traveled, the storm began to lessen, though snow still fell steadily. Hannah could make out more of the landscape, now rolling hills dotted with stands of pine and cottonwood, frozen streams that would run wild come spring. It was beautiful in its harsh way, this land that seemed determined to kill her. The other warriors gradually warmed to their unexpected guests, or at least stopped glaring quite so openly. One, who Red Cloud called Standing Bear, even shared his water with her, helping her drink when her hands shook too badly to hold the container. Your husband, Red Cloud said during one of their brief stops. He was a farmer. Yes, we came out from Indiana 2 years ago. He wanted to build something here, make a life where a man's worth wasn't determined by his family name. Hannah laughed bitterly. He didn't count on his own family being the ones to destroy that dream. Family should not cast out their own, Red Cloud said. Among my people, this would bring great shame. Among mine as well. Hannah replied, Or so I thought. They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. As the day wore on and the storm finally began to break, Hannah caught her first glimpse of their destination. The winter camp appeared like something from a dream, dozens of buffalo hide lodges arranged in careful patterns, smoke rising from their peaks, people moving between them with purpose and energy despite the cold. Dogs ran out to greet the returning warriors, and children appeared from the lodges, calling out excitedly until they saw the strangers and fell silent. Women emerged more slowly, their faces guarded as they took in the sight of a white woman barely conscious on their horses. Red Cloud dismounted and immediately began speaking to an elderly woman whose presence seemed to command respect from everyone around her. She listened without interrupting, her weathered face giving away nothing. When he finished, she approached Hannah's horse, studying her with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The woman said something in Sioux, then switched to broken English. "You are welcome here, but you must earn your place. We have no room for those who cannot contribute." It wasn't exactly the warmth Hannah had hoped for, but it was more than she'd gotten from her own kind. She nodded, not trusting her voice. As they helped her down from the horse, Hannah's legs finally gave out completely. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Red Cloud standing over her, Sarah safe in his arms, and the old woman calling out orders that sent people running in all directions. She'd made it to shelter, but at what cost? And what would these people expect from her when she woke, if she woke at all? Warmth. That was the first sensation that penetrated the fog of Hannah's consciousness. Not the bitter, burning cold that had been her constant companion, but genuine, life-giving warmth. She lay still, afraid that movement might shatter this blessed relief and plunge her back into the frozen nightmare. Slowly, other sensations filtered through, the soft fur beneath her, the smell of smoke and herbs, the murmur of voices speaking in that musical language she'd heard on the prairie. And somewhere nearby, the sound that made her eyes fly open despite her exhaustion, Sarah's cry. Not the weak whimper of a dying infant, but the full-throated complaint of a hungry baby. Hannah tried to sit up, but gentle hands pressed her back down. The elderly woman from before leaned over her, speaking in soothing tones despite the language barrier. She held a wooden bowl to Hannah's lips, and the warm broth that flowed down her throat was the finest thing she'd ever tasted. "Sarah," Hannah managed to croak. "My baby." The old woman nodded and called out. A younger woman appeared, carrying Sarah, who was wrapped in soft rabbit fur and looking remarkably healthy for a child who'd nearly frozen to death hours before. The infant was placed in Hannah's arms, and she clutched her daughter with desperate relief, tears streaming down her face. "She is strong," the elderly woman said in her broken English. "The little one wants to live. This is good." Over the next hours, Hannah learned that her savior was called Grandmother Singing Bird, and she was indeed the matriarch of this band. The younger woman who'd brought Sarah was White Dove, one of the tribe's healers who had worked through the night to save the infant's life. "We know the plants that warm the blood," White Dove explained in much better English than Grandmother Singing Bird. She showed Hannah a poultice applied to Sarah's chest, explaining how the herbs drew heat to the surface and strengthened the heart. "Your people's medicine is strong for some things, but the old ways know secrets you have forgotten." Hannah couldn't argue with results. Sarah's color had returned to healthy pink. Her breathing was steady, and she nursed eagerly when Hannah offered her breast. It was nothing short of miraculous. As the day progressed, Hannah was able to take in more of her surroundings. The lodge was larger than it appeared from outside, with a fire pit in the center that kept the entire space comfortable despite the winter cold. Beautiful geometric patterns decorated the hide walls, and various tools and weapons hung in organized displays. It was a home, she realized, as much as any cabin or farmhouse. Red Cloud visited in the afternoon, ducking through the entrance with natural grace. He studied Hannah for a moment before speaking. "You look better. Grandmother Singing Bird says you will recover fully." "Thanks to all of you," Hannah replied. "I owe you our lives." "This is not about debt." Red Cloud sat cross-legged near the fire, his face serious. "But we must speak of practical matters. My warriors are divided about your presence here. Some fear it will bring the soldiers down on us. Others—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Others remember too well what your people have done to ours." Hannah understood. She'd heard enough stories, seen enough fear and hatred on both sides to know the risk these people were taking. "I don't want to bring trouble to your camp. As soon as I'm able, Sarah and I will leave." "And go where?" Red Cloud's question was blunt, but not unkind. "Back to the family that cast you out, to the fort where you have no friends. No means of support. Winter has only begun. You would not last a week." He was right, and they both knew it. Hannah had no options. No plan beyond survival. The money Thomas had given her might buy supplies, but it wouldn't provide shelter or protection through the long months ahead. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked. "Grandmother Singing Bird has a proposal. You stay with us through the winter. In return, you contribute to the camp's survival. You know skills we could use: reading, writing, perhaps knowledge of white medicine that could complement our own, and—" He hesitated, then continued. "You could help us understand the whites better, their laws, their ways of thinking. This knowledge becomes more valuable as they press further into our lands." It was a practical arrangement, one that benefited both sides, but Hannah sensed there was more to it than simple utility. "Why did you save us, really?" Red Cloud was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I had a daughter once. She would be about your age now if the spotted sickness hadn't taken her 3 summers ago, when I saw you in the snow, holding your child." He shook his head. "A warrior can face many enemies, but he cannot fight the past. I could not save my daughter. Perhaps the spirits gave me a chance to save yours." The admission hung in the air between them, creating an unexpected moment of connection. Hannah had lost a husband. He had lost a child. Grief was a universal language. Over the following days, Hannah began to learn the rhythms of camp life. She was given simple tasks, at first helping to prepare meals, mending clothing, watching the younger children while their mothers worked. The women were initially standoffish, but Sarah proved to be an unexpected ambassador. Babies, it seemed, were universally adored, and the infant's quick recovery and cheerful disposition won hearts that might have remained closed to her mother. White Dove became her primary teacher, showing her which plants could be gathered even in winter, how to prepare traditional medicines, and the proper way to maintain a lodge. In return, Hannah shared what she knew of treating wounds and illnesses, though she was careful to present her knowledge as additional tools rather than superior methods. "Your people rely too much on bleeding and purging," White Dove observed one day as they prepared a remedy for an elderly man's joint pain. "The body needs its blood, its strength. Better to support it than weaken it further." Hannah had to admit the logic was sound. She'd seen too many people grow weaker under traditional white medicine's harsh treatments. The native approach of strengthening the body's natural defenses made more sense in many cases. Not everyone warmed to her presence. A young warrior named Black Elk made no secret of his suspicion, often speaking against her in council meetings that Red Cloud translated for her later. He'd lost family to white soldiers and saw her presence as a betrayal of their memory. "He is not wrong to be cautious," Red Cloud told her one evening as they watched the sunset paint the snow-covered hills in shades of rose and gold. "But he lets his pain blind him to possibility. This is the challenge we all face: how to honor the past while adapting to a changing world." Hannah found herself looking forward to these evening conversations. Red Cloud was an intelligent and thoughtful man, nothing like the savage warrior portrayed in the stories she'd heard. He spoke of philosophy, of dreams for his people, of the delicate balance between preserving tradition and surviving in a world increasingly dominated by white expansion. "My husband had dreams too," Hannah said one night as Sarah slept peacefully in her arms. "He believed that hard work and honesty would be enough to build a good life. He never understood that some men see kindness as weakness. Your husband sounds like he was a good man." "He was too good for this harsh world, perhaps." Hannah smiled sadly. "He would have liked you. I think he always said we had more to learn from your people than to teach." As winter deepened, Hannah's role in the camp evolved. Her ability to read and write proved valuable when traders visited, helping ensure fair deals and preventing misunderstandings. She began teaching some of the children basic English, knowing it might serve them well in the future, while they taught her their language in return. The day she delivered her first baby in the camp marked a turning point. The mother was young, frightened, and the birth was proving difficult. White Dove was attending another emergency, and the other women seemed uncertain. Hannah stepped in, drawing on memories of helping her own mother. who'd been a midwife back in Indiana. Working alongside grandmother Singing Bird, she helped turn the breech baby and guide it safely into the world. When the infant's cry filled the lodge, the women looked at her differently. She was no longer just the white woman they sheltered, but someone who had proven her worth in the most fundamental way, helping bring new life to the tribe. That night, there was a small celebration. Hannah sat with the other women, Sarah in her lap, feeling for the first time like she might actually belong here. She caught Red Cloud watching her from across the fire, something unreadable in his expression. Later, as the camp settled for sleep, he approached her. "You did well today. Grandmother Singing Bird says you have the hands of a healer." "I just did what needed doing," Hannah replied, but she was pleased by the praise. "That is what makes a true healer, seeing the need and acting without hesitation." He paused, then added, "The council meets tomorrow. They will discuss whether you can stay permanently or must leave when the snow melts. After today, I think the decision will be easier." Hannah's heart clenched. She'd been so focused on daily survival that she hadn't thought much about the future, but now, faced with the possibility of leaving this place that had become a haven, she realized how much she'd come to value this life. It wasn't just the practical support, it was the sense of community, of being valued for her contributions rather than judged for her circumstances. "What do you think they'll decide?" she asked. Red Cloud's smile was slight but warm. "I think Sarah has already decided for them. No one wants to see her leave." As he walked away, Hannah remained by the dying fire, looking up at the stars brilliant in the clear winter sky. Somewhere out there, Jacob's family slept warm in the cabin that should have been her home. Somewhere, soldiers and settlers planned their next moves into Indian territory. But here, in this circle of lodges, she'd found something unexpected, not just survival, but the possibility of a new kind of life. The winter was far from over, and challenges lay ahead. But for the first time since Jacob's death, Hannah felt something more than desperation. She felt hope. The fire crackled softly in the center of the lodge, casting dancing shadows on the hide walls. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but inside, there was warmth and peace. Hannah sat across from Red Cloud, Sarah sleeping soundly in a cradleboard that White Dove had crafted for her. These evening conversations had become a ritual over the past weeks, a time when the camp's leader would visit to discuss matters both practical and philosophical. "Tell me about your husband," Red Cloud said unexpectedly. They'd spoken of many things, the challenges facing his people, her life before coming west, the delicate balance of camp politics, but rarely of Jacob directly. Hannah's hands stilled on the moccasins she was decorating under Grandmother Singing Bird's tutelage. "Why do you want to know?" "To understand you, I must understand what shaped you. A person's choice of companion tells much about their heart." It was a fair point. Hannah set aside her work and gazed into the fire, gathering her thoughts. Jacob was different from other men I knew. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. When everyone else looked at the frontier and saw danger or profit, he saw a possibility. An idealist. Yes, but a practical one. He knew dreams needed strong backs and willing hands to build them. Hannah smiled at the memory. When he proposed, he didn't promise me wealth or comfort. He promised partnership, said he wanted a wife who would stand beside him, not behind him. This is unusual among your people. More than you might think, most men want wives to be silent, obedient, decorative. Jacob wanted a companion, someone to share both the burdens and the victories. Her voice caught slightly. He used to say that God gave humans two hands so they could work together, not so one could command while the other obeyed. Red Cloud nodded slowly. He sounds like a man who understood balance. This is something my people value highly. Sky and earth, sun and moon, man and woman each has its role, but neither is complete without the other. That's beautiful. Hannah said, Jacob would have appreciated that philosophy. He often said the Bible's greatest truth was that it wasn't good for man to be alone. And yet his own family violated this truth, casting you out. The statement hung in the air like smoke. Hannah had wondered about this contradiction many times during her recovery. How could people who claim to follow Christ's teachings act with such cruelty? Greed changes people, she finally said. Ezekiel Crane wasn't always harsh. When Jacob was young, his mother still lived, and by Jacob's telling, there was warmth in that family. But after she died, something hardened in Ezekiel. He began to see everything in terms of possession and loss, gain and threat. I have seen this among my people too, Red Cloud admitted. Loss can make us protective of what remains, sometimes to the point of destroying the very thing we seek to preserve. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Red Cloud spoke again. You speak of your husband with love, but not the desperate grief I often see in new widows. This is unusual. Hannah considered this. He was right somewhere in the past weeks. The raw agony of loss had transformed into something else. I think Jacob would be angry if I let grief consume me. He believed in moving forward, in finding purpose, even in pain. And Sarah needs me whole, not broken. This is wisdom. The dead do not want us to die with them. They want us to carry their best parts forward into life. Red Cloud's eyes grew distant. When my daughter died, I wanted to follow her to the spirit world, but my people needed their leader, and I realized that serving them honored her memory better than joining her. Tell me about her, Hannah said softly. It was the first time he'd offered any details about his lost child. Her name was Morningstar. She had her mother's beauty and, unfortunately, her father's stubbornness. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She wanted to be a warrior, not understanding why this path was closed to women. I found her once practicing with my bow. She could barely lift it, but her determination was fierce. How old was she? 8 summers when the spotted sickness came, old enough to have shown her spirit, young enough that her loss felt like a flower cut before blooming. His voice remained steady, but Hannah could hear the pain beneath. She would have been a force in this world. I think perhaps that's why the spirits called her early. They needed her strength elsewhere. I'm sorry, Hannah said, knowing how inadequate the words were. As am I, for your losses. But we are here, talking by this fire. Your daughter sleeping safely nearby. Life continues, and we must decide what to do with it. Sarah stirred in her sleep, making small, contented sounds. Both adults watched her. This tiny bridge between two worlds who knew nothing yet of the complexities surrounding her existence. The council meets tomorrow, Red Cloud said, returning to practical matters. There are things you should know. Black Elk will speak against you, this is expected. But Standing Bear has become your advocate, which surprised many. He says any woman who can endure what you endured to save her child has a warrior's heart, regardless of her skin color. And the others, divided, but leaning toward acceptance. Your work with healing, your respect for our ways, these things matter. But more than that. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. We are not fools. We know the white tide rises every year. Having someone among us who understands both worlds may prove valuable. You mean as a translator and intermediary? Perhaps, or perhaps simply as proof that understanding is possible, that we need not always be enemies. He stood, preparing to leave. Rest well tonight. Tomorrow's discussion will be long. But sleep eluded Hannah. She lay in the darkness, listening to the wind and thinking about paths forward. When she'd first arrived, staying had been about survival. Now it was about something more, a chance to build a different kind of life than the one she'd planned with Jacob. Not better or worse, just different. When dawn came, the camp was already stirring. Hannah went about her morning routine feeding Sarah, helping with breakfast preparations, checking on the elderly man whose joints she'd been treating. Normal activities that had become her new rhythm. The council meeting began at midday. Hannah wasn't allowed to attend. That was for full members of the band only, but she could see the gathering from where she worked with White Dove, preparing medicines. The discussion appeared animated, with several speakers rising to make their points. Black Elk speaks with passion, White Dove observed, grinding dried roots with practiced efficiency. But passion without wisdom is just noise. "Do you think they'll let us stay?" Hannah asked, trying not to sound as anxious as she felt. White Dove smiled. "You still think like a white woman, worrying about tomorrow when today has work enough. But yes, I think you will stay. Sarah has conquered more hearts than any warrior could." As if to prove the point, a group of children ran by, calling out greetings to little Sarah's mother in a mix of Sioux and English. Hannah had become defined by her daughter here, and she found she didn't mind. It was better than being the widow or the cast-out woman. The council meeting stretched through the afternoon. Hannah tried to focus on her work, but her attention kept drifting to the gathering. She saw Red Cloud speak at length, his gestures measured and authoritative. Black Elk's response was vehement, his body language radiating opposition. But then Standing Bear rose, and his words seemed to carry weight with the listeners. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the meeting finally concluded. Red Cloud approached, his expression unreadable. Hannah's heart hammered as she waited for the verdict. "The council has decided," he said formally. Then his face relaxed into what might almost be called a smile. "You and Sarah may stay as long as you wish. You will be given your own lodge come spring, though you may continue with Grandmother Singing Bird until then, if you prefer. You will have the same rights and responsibilities as any woman of the band." Relief flooded through Hannah so powerfully that she had to sit down. "Thank you. Thank you all." "Do not thank us yet. With acceptance comes expectation. You must continue to contribute, to learn our ways, to be one of us in truth, not just in residence." His expression grew serious again. "And there is another matter. The council believes it would be wise for you to formalize your position here, to have the protection that comes with belonging to a family within the band." Hannah understood what he wasn't quite saying. As an unmarried woman, her position would always be somewhat precarious. But she'd buried her husband barely 2 months ago. The thought of marriage, even for protection, felt impossible. I need time," she managed. "Of course. No one speaks of immediate action. But you should know that several men have already expressed interest in courting you when your mourning period ends. You are proven fertile, strong, skilled in healing. These are valued qualities." The practical discussion of her marriageable attributes should have offended her, but Hannah understood it came from a place of concern, not disrespect. This was survival, not romance. That evening, as she sat by the fire, nursing Sarah, Hannah found herself thinking about futures she'd never imagined. When she'd married Jacob, she'd thought her path was set farmer's wife, mother, partner in building a homestead. Now she was learning to be a healer in the tradition of people she'd once feared, living in a hide lodge, speaking a language she'd never expected to learn. Red Cloud joined her, as had become their custom, but tonight felt different, charged with possibility and complication. "You are troubled," he observed. "Thoughtful," Hannah corrected. "This morning I knew what the day would bring. Tonight, I must reimagine my entire future." "Is that such a bad thing? The future you planned is gone. Would you rather cling to its ghost or embrace what life offers now?" When you put it that way, the choice seems obvious, but the heart isn't always logical. "No," Red Cloud agreed. "It isn't." Something in his tone made Hannah look at him more closely. There was a weight to his words that suggested personal meaning. They spoke of other things the coming spring, plans for trade with the fort, the eternal challenge of keeping peace between young warriors and encroaching settlers. But beneath the practical discussion ran an undercurrent of awareness, a recognition that their relationship had shifted with the council's decision. as the fire burned low. Red Cloud rose to leave, but he paused at the lodge entrance. "Hannah Rose," he said, using her full name formally. "You should know I spoke strongly in favor of your staying, not just for the band's benefit, but for my own. This winter has been less cold with you here." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Hannah to stare at the dying embers and wonder at the strange turns life could take. She'd come here fleeing death and found life. She'd lost one future and discovered another. And somewhere in the space between grief and hope, something new was taking root, fragile as spring grass pushing through snow, but just as determined to grow. The news came with the morning scouts, riding hard through the melting snow. Soldiers from Fort Redemption were moving through the territory, asking questions about a white woman and infant who had disappeared in the winter storms. Red Cloud received the report in his lodge, his face grave as he dismissed the scouts and turned to his advisors. "How many soldiers?" Standing Bear asked. 24, led by a lieutenant and a sergeant. They claimed to be searching for a woman who may have been taken captive. The scout, a young warrior named Swift Arrow, spoke carefully. "They say her family is worried for her safety." Red Cloud's expression darkened. "Her family cast her out to die. Their concern comes late." The council gathered quickly, the urgency of the situation cutting through the normal rhythms of camp life. Hannah, working with White Dove to prepare spring medicines, noticed the unusual activity but didn't understand its cause until Red Cloud came to find her. "We need to speak privately," he said, his manner formal in a way that immediately set her on edge. In Grandmother Singing Bird's lodge, with the old woman and White Dove present as witnesses, Red Cloud explained the situation. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face as the implications became clear. "If they find you here, they will say we kidnapped you," Red Cloud said bluntly. "It won't matter what you tell them. They'll see what they want to see: savage Indians holding a white woman against her will. It would give them the excuse they've been seeking to attack our camp." "But I'll tell them the truth," Hannah protested. "You saved our lives. I'm here by choice." Grandmother Singing Bird shook her head. "Your soldiers will not believe that story. They cannot imagine a white woman choosing to live among us. They will think we have influenced your mind, or worse." Hannah knew they were right. She'd heard enough talk at the fort to know how such situations were interpreted. The narrative was always the same: innocent white women captured by brutal savages, needing rescue whether they wanted it or not. The truth was irrelevant when it conflicted with deeply held beliefs. "What do we do?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be difficult. "Several options," Red Cloud said. "You could leave now, make your way to the fort, claim you survived alone, but questions would be asked about how you managed such a feat, where you sheltered, how your child thrived in such conditions. They'd investigate," Hannah realized. Eventually, someone would talk. Traders, maybe, who've seen me here. "Precisely. The second option is to hide you. But with soldiers actively searching, this grows dangerous for everyone. If they discovered we'd concealed you..." He didn't need to finish. Hannah had heard about what happened to bands accused of harboring captives. The retribution was swift and brutal, often falling on innocents. "There is a third option," White Dove said quietly. "The abandoned trader's cabin at Elk Creek. It's a day's ride from here, isolated but known to travelers. We could create a story." Red Cloud nodded slowly. "You sheltered there after fleeing your husband's family, found supplies left by traders, managed to survive alone. It's plausible enough, and far enough from our camp to avoid suspicion. It was a good plan, but it meant leaving immediately, leaving the people who'd become her family." Hannah looked down at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in her cradleboard, unaware of the danger surrounding her. "When?" she asked. "Tonight. The soldiers are still 2 days away, but we need time to make the cabin look lived in, to establish your story." Red Cloud's voice was steady, but Hannah caught something in his eyes: regret loss. Standing Bear and I will escort you. We know the paths the soldiers won't travel." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Hannah gathered her belongings. Such as they were, the clothes she'd made during the winter. The medicines White Dove pressed into her hands. Small gifts from various members of the band. It was both too much and too little for starting over yet again. As word spread through the camp, people came to say goodbye in their own ways. Children she'd taught brought small treasures, a pretty stone, a carved wooden bird. Women she'd worked beside offered practical gifts pemmican for travel, a knife that had seen better days but still held an edge. Even Black Elk approached, though he said nothing, merely nodding once before walking away. Grandmother Singing Bird's farewell was hardest. The old woman held Sarah for a long time, singing a soft blessing over her. Then she turned to Hannah. "You have the spirit of two peoples now," she said in her broken English. "This is a hard gift, but a valuable one. Use it wisely." As darkness fell, Red Cloud and Standing Bear arrived with horses. Hannah wrapped Sarah carefully, the familiar ritual of preparing for a journey bringing back memories of that terrible night months ago. But this time was different. This time she was leaving by choice, to protect those who'd protected her. The ride through the darkness was silent, except for the sound of hooves on wet ground and the occasional call of a night bird. Standing Bear rode ahead, scouting the path, while Red Cloud stayed close to Hannah. Several times she caught him watching her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. They stopped once to rest the horses and feed Sarah. Standing Bear moved off to keep watch, leaving Hannah and Red Cloud alone by a small fire. "I'm sorry," Red Cloud said suddenly. "You should not have to run again." "It's not running," Hannah replied, though they both knew it was. "It's choosing to protect the people who protected me." "Noble words, but I know what it cost to leave a place where you found belonging." They sat in silence for a moment before Hannah asked the question that had been burning in her mind. What would have happened if the soldiers weren't coming? If I could have stayed? Red Cloud was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then I would have courted you properly, brought horses to Grandmother Singing Bird, proven I could provide for you and Sarah, shown you that a life between two worlds might be not a burden, but a bridge." The words hung in the air between them, precious and painful. Hannah felt tears sting her eyes. "And I might have said yes," she whispered. "Might have." There was the faintest smile in his voice. "Would have, in time." The admission cost her, but she owed him truth. Red Cloud reached out, taking her hand gently. His fingers were calloused from years of weapons and reins, but his touch was careful. Perhaps the spirits have different plans. Perhaps this separation is temporary. "Perhaps," Hannah agreed, though they both knew the chances were slim. The divide between their worlds grew wider each year, fed by fear and misunderstanding on both sides. They reached the cabin as dawn was breaking. It was a modest structure, but solid, with a roof that would keep out rain and walls that would block wind. Inside, evidence of hasty abandonment, an overturned chair, scattered belongings, but also usable supplies. Standing Bear immediately began arranging things to support their story, making it look as though Hannah had been living here for weeks. "The story is simple," Red Cloud instructed as they worked. "You found this place after 2 days in the storm. The trader who owned it must have left quickly, perhaps fleeing debts or trouble. You've been here since, living on what was left behind and what you could gather." "But I don't know enough about wilderness survival," Hannah protested. "They'll ask questions I can't answer. You know more than you think," White Dove said. She'd been teaching Hannah about edible plants, basic tracking, how to set simple snares. "And what you don't know, you were too cold and frightened to remember clearly. The mind plays tricks when death is close." They spent the morning drilling the story, anticipating questions, preparing answers. Hannah practiced looking gaunt and desperate, though the months of good food and care made this difficult. White Dove helped, using plant dyes to create shadows under her eyes, making small cuts on her hands that would look like they'd come from desperate foraging. As the sun reached its zenith, it was time for her protectors to leave. They needed to be well away before the soldiers arrived. Standing Bear left first, with a simple nod and a warrior's blessing for Sarah. Red Cloud lingered. "Remember," he said, "you survived because you are strong. Not because anyone saved you. You saved yourself. The soldiers must believe this absolutely." "I understand." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small object, a carved piece of red stone in the shape of a bird. "For Sarah," he said, "when she is older, tell her it means she has the spirit of two peoples, like her mother. Tell her this is not a weakness, but a strength." Hannah clutched the small carving, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Red Cloud touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Be well." Hannah rose. "Perhaps one day, when the world is different." "Perhaps," she managed. And then he was gone, disappearing into the forest with the skill of one born to it. Hannah stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching the empty woods, feeling more alone than she had even on that terrible night in the storm. But she wasn't truly alone. Sarah began to fuss, reminding her that life continued, needs remained. The future still waited to be written. Hannah closed the door and set about making the cabin truly look lived in, each action taking her further from the life she'd found and closer to the deception that would keep that life safe. When the soldiers came, she would be ready. She would play her part perfectly, not for her own sake, but for all those who'd shown her that humanity existed in unexpected places. The real captivity, she realized, would be returning to a world that couldn't imagine such truth. As night fell over the empty cabin, Hannah held Sarah close and sang her the lullaby Grandmother Singing Bird had taught her, a song in a language her daughter might never hear again, carrying the memory of a winter that had changed everything and a love that could never be acknowledged in the world she was returning to. The soldiers arrived on the second day, their horses' hooves announcing their approach long before they came into view. Hannah had been watching from the window, Sarah clutched in her arms, practicing the fear she needed to display. When she saw the blue uniforms through the trees, the fear became real, not of the soldiers themselves, but of failing to convince them. She waited until they were close enough to see her clearly, then stumbled out of the cabin, making her movements deliberately unsteady. "Help!" she called, her voice cracking with genuine emotion. "Please, help us!" The soldiers reined in their horses, hands moving instinctively to weapons before they recognized her as a white woman. The lieutenant, a young man with kind eyes and a carefully waxed mustache, dismounted immediately. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Morrison. You're safe now." He approached slowly, as if she might bolt like a frightened deer. "Are you Hannah Rowe's wife of Jacob Rose?" "Was," Hannah corrected, letting her voice break. "My husband, he died months ago. The fever took him." The sergeant, an older man with scars that spoke of Indian wars, remained mounted, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "You've been here alone all this time." Hannah nodded, holding Sarah up slightly. "My baby. We had nowhere else to go. My husband's family." She let the sentence trail off, knowing that partial truths were more believable than complete stories. Lieutenant Morrison's expression softened with sympathy. "We'll get you back to Fort Redemption. You'll be safe there." He turned to his men. "Sergeant Pike, have the men search the area. Make sure we're alone." This was the dangerous moment. Hannah forced herself to remain calm as soldiers dismounted and spread out, checking the cabin and surrounding woods. If they found any sign of the Sioux band, any indication she hadn't been alone. "Lieutenant," she said, swaying slightly, "I need to sit. We've been so hungry." Morrison immediately supported her arm, guiding her back into the cabin. The distraction worked his focus on her welfare rather than searching for evidence. Inside, he took in the meager supplies, the makeshift repairs she'd made to gaps in the walls, the pitiful pile of firewood. "How did you survive?" he asked, genuine amazement in his voice. Hannah had rehearsed this answer carefully. "I found this place after walking for 2 days. Whoever lived here left in a hurry. There were supplies. Enough to last if I was careful. I remembered some things my mother taught me about preserving food, finding edible plants." She showed him her hands, the cuts and calluses White Dove had helped create. It wasn't easy. Sergeant Pike entered, his expression skeptical. "No sign of anyone else, sir, but there's a lot of traffic through these woods, game trails, but also—" He paused, looking at Hannah. "Other trails." "Indians?" Morrison asked. "Possibly, hard to say with the snow melt." Hannah's heart raced, but she kept her expression fearful rather than guilty. "I've seen signs sometimes, smoke in the distance. Once I thought I heard horses, but no one ever came here." The lie tasted bitter, but she delivered it smoothly. Pike studied her with hard eyes. "You weren't bothered by Indians at all? A white woman alone with a baby?" "I hid whenever I sensed danger." Hannah replied, "Kept the fire low, stayed quiet. Maybe they never knew I was here, or maybe—" She let superstition creep into her voice. "Maybe they thought the place was cursed. The trader who lived here. He left so suddenly. Left everything behind." It was a clever addition to the story. Many Indians did avoid places where bad things had happened, and the soldiers would know this. Morrison nodded, accepting the explanation, but Pike remained suspicious. "We should check her for signs of interference," Pike said carefully. "Make sure she hasn't been harmed or influenced." Hannah understood the implication and felt sick. They wanted to ensure she hadn't been violated or brainwashed by her captors. She submitted to their questions with apparent gratitude, describing her daily routines, her fear, her desperate prayers for rescue. "The baby seems remarkably healthy," Pike observed, studying Sarah with narrowed eyes. "She's strong," Hannah said, pride creeping into her voice before she could stop it. "Like her father. And I gave her everything, even when it meant I went without." This was believable. Any mother would sacrifice for her child. Morrison intervened before Pike could pursue his suspicions further. "The important thing is that they're safe now. We'll take them back to the fort. Let the doctor examine them properly." He turned to Hannah. "Do you have family we should contact, anyone who might take you in?" "No," Hannah said quietly. "My family is back in Indiana. I have no one here except—" She hesitated artfully. "My husband's family might take pity on us now. They were grieving when they asked me to leave. Perhaps time has softened their hearts." Morrison's expression suggested he had opinions about family who had cast out a widow and infant, but he kept them to himself. "We'll make inquiries. For now, you'll be cared for at the fort." As the soldiers prepared to leave, Hannah gathered her few belongings, making sure to include things that supported her story. The journal where she'd documented her ordeal, carefully backdated, the crude tools she'd supposedly fashioned, the remnants of her original clothing, torn and stained from her flight through the storm. She took one last look around the cabin that had been her stage for this deception. Somewhere out there, Red Cloud and his band were waiting to hear if their gamble had paid off. She couldn't look for them, couldn't give any sign of connection. She had to be perfectly alone, perfectly grateful for rescue. The ride to Fort Redemption took the rest of the day. Morrison rode beside her, making gentle conversation, trying to draw her out of what he perceived as trauma-induced silence. Hannah played her part, offering monosyllabic responses, clutching Sarah like a lifeline, occasionally allowing tears to fall. But inside, her heart was breaking. Each mile took her further from the life she'd discovered, the people who'd shown her kindness, the man who might have offered her a different future. She thought of grandmother singing Bird's wisdom, White Dove's friendship, The children who'd called her Sarah's mother with such easy acceptance. All of it was behind her now, and ahead lay only uncertainty. As they neared the fort, Pike maneuvered his horse closer. "Interesting that you survived so well. Mrs. Rose, most women in your situation would have perished in days, not months." "Perhaps God was watching over us," Hannah replied, meeting his suspicious gaze steadily. "Or perhaps you underestimate what a mother will do to save her child." Pike's smile was thin. "Perhaps. Though in my experience, when something seems too remarkable to be true, there's usually more to the story." "Sergeant," Morrison's voice carried a warning. "Mrs. Rose has been through enough without facing interrogation from us." But Hannah knew Pike's suspicions wouldn't simply disappear. He was a man who'd spent years fighting Indians, seeing threats in every shadow. He would watch her, wait for her to make a mistake, reveal the truth he suspected lay beneath her story. The fort appeared before them as the sun began to set, its wooden walls a stark reminder of the divide between worlds. Inside those walls, she would have to continue her performance indefinitely, always careful, always alone with her secret. The red stone bird Red Cloud had given her seemed to burn in her pocket, the only tangible reminder of a winter that had changed everything. As they rode through the gates, Hannah saw curious faces peering from windows and doorways. News of her rescue would spread quickly. By tomorrow, everyone would know the story of the widow who'd survived alone in the wilderness. Some would admire her strength, others would question it, but none would know the truth that she hadn't been alone at all, that the savages they feared had shown her more humanity than her own kind. Lieutenant Morrison helped her dismount, his touch gentle but impersonal. "Welcome back to civilization, Mrs. Rose," he said with a smile he probably thought was reassuring. Hannah nodded, holding Sarah close, and stepped through the fort's gates. But as she crossed that threshold, she couldn't help but wonder which world truly deserved to be called civilized, the one that had cast her out to die, or the one that had taken her in without condition. The answer was clear in her heart, but it was a truth she could never speak. The gates closed behind her with a sound like finality, and Hannah Rose began the next act of her necessary deception, carrying within her the memories of a winter's grace and the weight of unspoken love. The fort's doctor, a weathered man named Samuel Hawkins, examined Hannah and Sarah with methodical precision. His frown deepened as he checked Sarah's healthy weight, her clear skin, her bright eyes, all signs that contradicted the story of desperate survival. "Remarkable," he murmured, listening to Sarah's strong heartbeat. "This child shows no signs of malnutrition or exposure. Quite the opposite. In fact," Hannah had anticipated this. "I gave her everything," she said quietly. "Every bit of food that was fit for a baby, all the warmth I could provide. A mother does what she must." "Doctor," Hawkins studied her over his spectacles. "At considerable cost to yourself, it seems." He noted her deliberately gaunt appearance, the shadows White Dove had helped create. "Though you too seem surprisingly resilient." "I was fortunate. The trader who abandoned that cabin left preserves, dried meat, even some medicine." She showed him the herbs White Dove had given her, common enough plants that any frontier woman might know. "My mother taught me about healing plants when I was young." The doctor examined the herbs with interest. "Yes, I recognize some of these. Willow bark for pain, echinacea for illness. Smart thinking." But his expression remained thoughtful, as if pieces of a puzzle didn't quite fit. Colonel Whitfield, the fort's commander, arrived as the examination concluded. He was a political man. Hannah could see immediately the kind who measured every situation by how it might advance or hinder his career. "Mrs. Rose," he said with practiced warmth. "What a remarkable story of survival. The newspapers back east will be fascinated. Frontier woman survives winter ordeal. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" Hannah's stomach turned. The last thing she wanted was attention. questions from journalists who might dig deeper than soldiers. "I'd rather not have any attention, Colonel. I just want to rebuild my life quietly." "Nonsense, your story could inspire other women, show the strength of American character in the face of adversity." His smile was calculating. "Of course. We'll need to conduct a full investigation first, standard procedure when there's been potential Indian involvement." "But I never saw any Indians," Hannah protested, knowing her objection was expected. Of course. But we must be thorough. Sergeant Pike will lead the inquiry." The colonel's choice was deliberate. Pike, with his suspicious nature and hatred of Indians, would dig until he found something or created it from nothing. As if summoned by his name, Pike appeared in the doorway. "Sir, there's a Mr. Ezekiel Crane here. Says he's the woman's father-in-law." Hannah's blood chilled. She'd known this confrontation would come, but she'd hoped for more time to prepare. Ezekiel entered like he owned the fort, his sons trailing behind. Thomas caught her eye for just a moment, something like guilt flickering across his face before he looked away. "Hannah," Ezekiel said, his voice dripping false concern. "We were so worried when we heard, after you left in such haste that night, refusing our hospitality." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Hannah saw Morrison's jaw tighten. He'd heard her version of events, but Ezekiel was already spinning his tale for the colonel's benefit. "She was distraught after Jacob's death," Ezekiel continued. "We begged her to stay, but grief can make people act irrationally. When she fled into that storm with the baby," he shook his head sorrowfully, "we searched for days." "That's not," Hannah began, but Whitfield raised a hand. "Please, Mrs. Rose, let Mr. Crane finish. You'll have your chance to speak." Ezekiel's story painted him as the concerned patriarch, Hannah as the hysterical widow who'd endangered her child through stubborn pride. It was masterfully done, containing just enough truth to be plausible while completely reversing the reality of that night. When he finished, all eyes turned to Hannah. She could see the calculation in Whitfield's face, who to believe, the established rancher with connections and influence, or the traumatized widow with a fantastic tale of survival. "Ask Thomas," she said quietly. "He was there. He knows what really happened." Thomas shifted uncomfortably as attention focused on him. For a moment, Hannah dared hope he might tell the truth, but family loyalty won. "Father's right," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We tried to convince her to stay. The storm was terrible that night." The betrayal cut deep, even though she'd expected it. Only the memory of the coins he'd pressed into her hand kept her from complete despair. He'd helped as much as he dared, but he wouldn't stand against his father publicly. "You see," Ezekiel spread his hands, "a tragedy of misunderstanding. But we're prepared to do the Christian thing. Hannah may return with us, resume her place in the family. We'll raise young Sarah as a true Crane." Hannah saw the trap immediately. Under Ezekiel's roof, she'd be little better than a servant, and Sarah would be molded into whatever Ezekiel wanted, likely married off young to cement some business alliance. But refusing would make her look unstable, ungrateful. "That's very generous," Whitfield said, clearly seeing the neat solution to his problem. A widow reunited with family made a better story than one abandoned to die. "I need time to consider," Hannah said carefully. "After everything that's happened." "Of course," Ezekiel agreed, magnanimous in his false victory. "We'll be staying at the hotel. Take all the time you need to see reason, to recover from your ordeal." After the Cranes left, Morrison approached her. "That's not how you told it on the trail," he said quietly. "Would anyone believe me over him?" Hannah asked bitterly. "He has influence, connections. I'm just a widow with a wild story." Morrison's silence was answer enough. In the frontier's harsh social calculus, Ezekiel Crane's word carried more weight than hers ever could. That night, Hannah was given a small room in the fort's guest quarters. She sat by the window, holding Sarah and watching the stars, the same stars that shone over a Sioux camp somewhere in the darkness. Was Red Cloud watching them too? Did he wonder if she was safe? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Lieutenant Morrison with a tray of food. "Thought you might be hungry," he said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, grateful for the company of someone who seemed genuinely kind. Morrison set the tray down and stood awkwardly, clearly wrestling with something. "I've been thinking about your story," he finally said. "About surviving alone all winter. It's remarkable, almost unbelievable." Hannah's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Many things seem unbelievable until they happen to you." "True." He paused. "I've spent time among the Sioux. During peace negotiations 2 years ago. They're not the savages many claim. In fact, I found them quite civilized in their own way." The statement hung in the air, laden with meaning. Hannah remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the implications. Morrison continued. "If someone had helped you hypothetically, and if revealing that help would endanger innocent people, well, I could understand why that person might craft a different story." Their eyes met, and Hannah saw understanding there, even sympathy. But she couldn't risk trusting him, not when any admission could destroy the band that had saved her. "I survived alone," she said firmly. "God watched over us." Morrison nodded slowly. "Of course, though I wonder if sometimes God works through unexpected hands." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Be careful of Ezekiel Crane. Mrs. Rose. His concern seems more focused on control than care. And be especially careful of Sergeant Pike. He's like a dog with a bone when he suspects something." After he left, Hannah allowed herself a moment of hope. Perhaps she had one ally in this place after all. But allies weren't enough when faced with Ezekiel's manipulation and Pike's suspicion. She looked down at Sarah, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the forces arranging themselves around her future. The red stone bird was hidden in Hannah's clothing, but she could feel its presence, a reminder of another possible life. One where Sarah could grow up bridging 2 worlds instead of being trapped in one. Tomorrow, Ezekiel would return, pressing his advantage. Pike would continue his investigation. The colonel would want his neat resolution, and Hannah would have to navigate these dangers while maintaining her deception, protecting those who'd protected her. She thought of Red Cloud's words, "Life continues, and we must decide what to do with it." The decision seemed impossible except Ezekiel's charity, and condemn Sarah to a life of control, or refuse and risk deeper investigation that might expose the truth. But as she watched her daughter sleep, Hannah felt a familiar strength rise within her. She'd survived a winter storm, found unlikely salvation, and created a believable deception. She could survive this too. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she held her daughter and remembered a different warmth, the warmth of a lodge fire, of acceptance without conditions, of a tall warrior's gentle touch as he gave her a carved bird for her daughter. "Someday," she whispered to Sarah, "I'll tell you the truth. About the winter that should have killed us but didn't. About the people who saw our humanity when our own kind didn't. About bridges that might still be built." The fort settled into sleep around them, but Hannah remained awake, planning her next moves in a game where the stakes were not just her future, but the safety of those who'd risked everything to save 2 strangers in a storm. Whatever came next, she would not let their kindness be repaid with betrayal. The investigation dragged on for 2 weeks, with Pike interviewing traders, scouts, and anyone who'd traveled the territory during the winter months. Hannah maintained her story through repeated questioning, never wavering in the details she'd memorized. But she could see Pike's frustration growing. He knew something was wrong, but couldn't prove it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A trader named Jules Beaumont arrived at the fort with supplies and gossip from across the territory, over whiskey in the sutler's store. He mentioned seeing a white woman at the Sioux winter camp months ago. "Just a glimpse through the trees," he said, not knowing Pike was listening from the next table. Thought my eyes were playing tricks, but she had yellow hair, like corn silk, and was carrying a baby. Pike was at Hannah's door within the hour. Interesting news from Beaumont, he said. His smile predatory. Seems someone matching your description was seen at Red Cloud's camp. Hannah had prepared for this possibility. There are other white women on the frontier, Sergeant, other mothers with fair hair and babies. True, but how many were missing during the exact time you claim to have been alone in that cabin? Pike stepped closer. I think you're lying. Mrs. Rose. I think those savages had you all winter, and now you're protecting them. Question is, why did they threaten you? Do something to make you sympathetic to their cause. Before Hannah could respond, Lieutenant Morrison appeared. Sergeant Pike, the colonel wants to see you. Immediately. Pike's face flushed with anger at the interruption, but he couldn't ignore a summons. After he left, Morrison quickly entered and closed the door. Beaumont's changed his story, he said quietly. Says he was drinking when he made that claim, that it was probably just a Sioux woman with lighter skin. Seems someone reminded him how dangerous it is to spread unverified rumors that could start a war. Hannah sagged with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Colonel Whitfield. He wants this matter resolved quickly and quietly. A scandal involving a white woman living willingly with Indians would bring unwanted attention from Washington. Morrison paused. He's decided to accept your story as told. The investigation is over. But Hannah's relief was short-lived. With the investigation closed, pressure mounted for her to make a decision about Ezekiel's offer. The colonel made it clear he expected her to accept a widow reconciled with family, made for a better report than one refusing charity out of pride. I need more time. Hannah insisted during yet another meeting. Sarah's been ill. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her daughter had developed a mild fever, though nothing serious. You've had 2 weeks, Whitfield said impatiently. Mr. Crane has been more than patient. Some might say refusing his generosity shows ingratitude for your rescue. The threat was subtle but clear. Refuse Ezekiel, and questions might resurface about her story. Hannah felt the walls closing in. That night, as she walked Sarah around the room trying to soothe her fever, Hannah made her decision. She couldn't go with Ezekiel. She'd seen the calculating look in his eyes when he watched Sarah. Her daughter would be a commodity to him. Nothing more. But she couldn't stay at the fort indefinitely either. There was a third option, one Morrison had inadvertently suggested. His sister ran a boarding house in Denver, taking in respectable widows who could work for their keep. It was far enough from both Ezekiel and the Sioux camp to offer safety for everyone. The next morning, Hannah presented her decision. I'm grateful for Mr. Crane's offer, she told the assembled group. But I believe it's best for Sarah and me to make a fresh start. Lieutenant Morrison has kindly arranged a position for me in Denver. Ezekiel's face darkened. You'd refuse family to work as a common boarding house servant. I choose honest work over charity with conditions, Hannah replied, meeting his angry gaze steadily. You always were too proud for your own good. Ezekiel spat. Don't come crying to us when you're starving in some Denver gutter. I won't, Hannah assured him. I've survived worse than poverty. Thomas caught her arm as the family left. The money, he whispered urgently. Do you still have it? Yes. Good. Use it wisely. And Hannah. He glanced around, then pressed something else into her hand. From the sale of Jacob's horse, he'd want Sarah to have it. Before she could respond, he was gone, hurrying after his father. Hannah looked down at the small leather pouch, heavier than the first. Perhaps Thomas's conscience wasn't as dead as she'd thought. 3 days later, Hannah stood on the fort's wall, Sarah in her arms, watching a wagon train prepare for departure. Denver lay weeks ahead, a new chapter in their strange journey. Morrison had arranged everything, even providing a letter of introduction to his sister. You'll do well there, he said, joining her on the wall. "Mary's a good woman. She'll treat you fairly." "Why have you helped us?" Hannah asked. "You don't know us, don't owe us anything." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Maybe because I've seen too much ugliness on the frontier from all sides. When I find a chance to do something decent, I take it." He paused. "And maybe because I don't entirely believe your story, but I respect your reasons for telling it." They stood in companionable silence, watching the sunrise paint the distant hills gold. Somewhere out there, Red Cloud's band continued their nomadic life. Hannah wondered if he thought of her, if he knew she was safe. As if reading her thoughts, Morrison said, "The Sioux will move north for the summer hunting. Red Cloud's band always follows the same pattern. But there are rumors of a peace council in the fall, representatives from various bands meeting with government officials." Hannah's heart leaped, though she kept her expression neutral. "That's good. Peace benefits everyone." "Yes, and sometimes peace negotiations require translators, people who understand both sides." Morrison's tone was carefully casual. "Denver's not so far that someone couldn't travel for such important work." The possibility hung in the air, a chance to see Red Cloud again, to bridge the world she now straddled. It seemed impossible. But then, so had surviving that winter night. The wagon master called for boarding. Hannah thanked Morrison one last time and climbed aboard, settling among the other passengers, a mix of hopeful settlers and weary travelers, all seeking something in the West's vast promises. As Fort Redemption faded behind them, Hannah pulled out her journal, but instead of maintaining the fiction of her winter ordeal, she began writing the truth, not for others to read, but for Sarah, someday, when the world was ready or when it no longer mattered. Her daughter would know the real story of that winter. She wrote of grandmother singing birds' wisdom, of white dove's friendship, of standing bear's grudging acceptance. She wrote of children who saw no difference in skin color and of warriors who chose mercy over convention. And she wrote of Red Cloud, his strength, his gentleness, his vision of a world where understanding might bridge the gap between peoples. The red stone bird rested against her heart, hidden but ever present. Sarah played with a strand of Hannah's hair, happy and healthy, unaware of the complex heritage she carried. She was a child of two worlds, bearing the strength of both. As the wagon rolled west toward Denver and new possibilities, Hannah realized her story wasn't ending, it was transforming. The winter that should have killed them had instead given them new life. The people who should have been enemies had shown them family. And the future, uncertain as it was, held the promise of bridges yet to be built. She'd lost the life she'd planned with Jacob, but she'd gained something else, an understanding that humanity existed everywhere, that love could grow in unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest wealth wasn't measured in gold or land, but in the connections between hearts that refused to see difference where others saw only division. The journal entry complete. Hannah tucked it away safely. Someday, Sarah would read these words and understand that her mother had been given a choice between comfortable lies and difficult truths. And Hannah had chosen truth, even when she could only speak it in whispers and written words. The wagon train moved steadily westward, carrying a woman and child toward a future unwritten. Behind them lay a story of survival that was so much more than anyone would ever know. And ahead lay Denver. Work, struggle, but also hope. Hope that someday the two worlds Hannah now carried within her might find a way to coexist in peace. For now, that hope was enough. It had to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow Western story lovers from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts on Hannah and Red Cloud's story. What would you have done in Hannah's place?